I never thought I'd be telling the story, but sometimes life throws you such unexpected curveballs that you just have to get it all out, if only to make sense of it for yourself. My name is Madison, and at 35, I've already weathered more joy and gut-wrenching pain than I ever thought possible. The world I once knew, secure and predictable, has completely crumbled around me, leaving me to pick up the jagged pieces and desperately try to understand where everything went so horribly wrong. So let me take you back to the beginning. About a year ago, I had just finalized my divorce from Blake, my ex-husband. Surprisingly, despite the emotional turmoil, we managed to keep things remarkably civil. Blake, a genuinely wealthy man, was incredibly generous in the settlement. He left me our sprawling suburban house, the one with the huge backyard where our son, Alex, loved to play, and also an apartment in the city that provided a steady stream of rental income. The house was beautiful, filled with memories, and the apartment was in a prime location, ensuring I'd never have to fret about finding tenants. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming to visit?" Alex would ask me almost every single day, his big innocent blue eyes brimming with hope. He was only 6, and despite the divorce, Blake remained a constant and loving presence in his young life. "This weekend, sweetheart, remember? He promised to take you to the park," I'd reply, a wave of gratitude washing over me that at least this part of our fractured family still functioned. Blake would arrive like clockwork every Saturday morning, his expensive SUV pulling into our driveway at precisely 9 a.m., never a minute late. "You're doing a great job with him, Maddie," Blake told me one day after dropping Alex off, a hint of genuine admiration in his voice. "I know this isn't easy, but you're handling it better than anyone could." My own family situation, however, was complicated, to say the least. My parents had divorced when I was just 3, and my mother remarried pretty quickly. I still vividly remember the bewildering experience of suddenly having a new man in the house, someone I was expected to call Dad. A year later, my half-sister, Brittany, was born. Growing up, Brittany and I were never close. We maintained what I'd describe as a politely distant relationship. Different fathers, different personalities, different lives. "Why don't you and Aunt Brittany ever hang out like other sisters?" Alex once asked me innocently during dinner, his little fork pushing around the green beans he was determined to avoid eating. I remember pausing, searching for the right words before answering. "Sometimes sisters are just different, honey, but that's okay. Just like how you don't always want to play with every kid in your class." But his innocent observation cut deeper than he knew. "But she never comes to my birthday parties," he pointed out, finally resigning himself to a spoonful of green beans. "Brittany is very busy with her own life," I explained, though the truth was far more tangled. Brittany had always seemed to harbor resentment towards our family dynamics, especially after my father continued to support me financially through college, while her own father struggled to make ends meet. Oh, if only I'd known then how those seemingly insignificant differences would eventually tear our family apart. Looking back now, the warning signs were glaringly obvious. The subtle eye rolls when I mentioned my new car, the backhanded compliments about my lucky marriage to Blake, the way she'd suddenly become unavailable whenever I invited her to family gatherings at our house. "Your sister's just jealous," my friend Sarah used to tell me, her voice laced with certainty. "Some people just can't handle seeing others succeed." I'd always brush off such comments, clinging to the naive belief that family was family, and that someday we'd find a way to bridge the growing chasm between us. How utterly naive I was. Everything irrevocably changed when my grandmother, my father's mother, passed away. She was a simple woman who lived in a modest little house on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where window boxes overflowed with vibrant geraniums, and the screen door creaked in that same familiar way it had for the past 30 years. The funeral was small but dignified, just as she would have wanted. What I absolutely did not expect was that she'd left everything to me in her will, the house and all her savings. I hadn't even known she had savings. "Your grandmother always had a soft spot for you, Maddie," my father told me at the funeral, his eyes red-rimmed as we stood in the quiet cemetery. "She loved how you'd visit her every Sunday with Alex, even after the divorce. She used to tell me, 'That girl has a good heart, just like her daddy.' I just wish Alex could have had more time with her," I replied, my voice thick with emotion as I watched my son place a small bouquet of daisies he'd picked himself from our garden that morning on her grave. "Mommy, is great-grandma in heaven now?" Alex asked, his small hand slipping trustingly into mine. "Yes, sweetheart, and I bet she's already baking her famous chocolate chip cookies up there." I was still reeling from the unexpected inheritance when my parents called me over to their house for what they called an important family discussion. The moment I walked in, I could practically taste the tension hanging heavy in the air. The house smelled of my mother's signature pot roast, but the familiar comfort of home was completely overshadowed by an unmistakable atmosphere of impending confrontation. My mother sat me down at their kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared countless family dinners, the scratches from Brittany's rebellious teenage years still visible in the wood, permanent reminders of our complicated family history. "Would you like some coffee, Maddie?" my mother asked, already pouring me a cup in the chipped mug she knew was my favorite. "We need to talk about your grandmother's house," she began, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned to be wary of since childhood. "What about it?" I asked, a knot of defensiveness already tightening in my stomach. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Well," my stepfather chimed in, leaning forward in his chair, which groaned loudly under his weight. "You have to admit, you've got quite a bit of property now. The house from Blake, the rental apartment, and now this." He let the words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken implication. I watched as my mother nodded along, her perfectly manicured nails tapping a nervous rhythm against her own coffee cup, a sound that set my teeth on edge. "Brittany's been struggling, you know," my mother continued, her voice taking on that persuasive, almost manipulative tone she'd perfected over the years. "She's been renting that tiny apartment for years. It's barely bigger than a closet, really, and with her salary at the city administration, well, you know how government jobs pay." I sat silently, watching the steam curl from my untouched coffee. "We thought, well, wouldn't it be fair if you gave her grandmother's house?" My mother reached across the table to pat my hand, her touch feeling strangely cold. "After all, you've been so blessed, Maddie and Brittany. Well, she's had it rough." "It's not like it's a particularly valuable property," my stepfather added, with what he probably thought was a winning smile. "You wouldn't really be losing much, and think how much it would mean to your sister." I sat there utterly stunned by their sheer audacity, but also feeling that familiar tug of guilt creeping in. It was true. I did have more than Brittany, and the little house wasn't particularly grand. The weight of their expectations pressed down on me like a physical force. "Have you even discussed this with Brittany?" I asked, already knowing the answer from the way they exchanged furtive glances. "Well, we wanted to talk to you first," my mother said quickly. "But she's been having such a hard time lately, you know. She broke up with that boyfriend of hers, the one from the bank." I hadn't even known. A sudden sharp realization hit me. I knew very little about my sister's life these days. When was the last time we'd had a real conversation? Christmas, maybe? And even then, it had been mostly superficial small talk about the weather and Brittany's endless complaints about her job. What my parents didn't know, what no one knew except me, was that Alex's health had been steadily deteriorating lately. The signs were subtle at first, unexplained bruises that seemed to appear out of nowhere, frequent and debilitating fatigue, a pallor that no amount of time in the sunlight seemed to cure. He'd been a sickly child since birth, but doctors had struggled to pinpoint the exact cause. They kept saying he was just a delicate child, that some kids simply took longer to build up their immune systems. But a mother's intuition is a powerful thing, and deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. It wasn't until he turned 4 that we received the devastating news: blood cancer. I remember sitting in Dr. Martinez's sterile office, the walls covered with cheerful children's drawings that seemed to mock the crushing gravity of the moment. "The tests are conclusive," Dr. Martinez said gently, sliding the results across her desk. "It's acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I know this is overwhelming, but we need to start treatment immediately." I clutched Alex's small hand, trying desperately to maintain a semblance of composure for my brave little boy. "What are his chances?" I choked out, my voice trembling. "Every case is different," she hedged, but her compassionate eyes told me more than her carefully chosen words. We're seeing some concerning patterns in his latest tests. The treatment isn't working as well as we'd hoped. The next few months became a horrifying blur of endless hospital visits, grueling chemotherapy sessions that left my son weak and nauseous, and countless nights spent sleeping in uncomfortable chairs beside Alex's bed, praying for a miracle. Blake, despite our divorce, was there every single step of the way, his support unwavering. Whatever he needs, whatever it costs, he'd say, his usual businesslike demeanor cracking whenever Alex's illness was discussed. I'll make sure he gets the best treatment available. I was stretched impossibly thin, juggling hospital visits, trying to keep up with work, and now this relentless family pressure about the house. Maybe that's why I caved so easily when my parents relentlessly suggested giving the house to Brittany. In the face of my son fighting for his very life, the decision seemed so utterly insignificant. I numbly handed over the keys to her one afternoon between Alex's agonizing treatments. I'll transfer the paperwork once things settle down with Alex's treatment, I told her, my mind already racing ahead to his next doctor's appointment. Oh my God, thank you, Brittany shrieked, throwing her arms around me in a tight hug, the first genuine physical contact we'd had in years. Her perfume was overwhelmingly sweet, making me feel slightly nauseous. I'm going to throw the best housewarming party ever in a month. You'll come, right? And Alex too, if he's feeling up to it. I barely registered her excited chatter. My mind was consumed by Alex's latest test results, by the way his small face had grown increasingly pale, by how he'd stopped asking to go to the park or play with his favorite toys. Mommy, he'd asked me one night in the sterile hospital room, his voice barely a whisper, am I going to get better? Of course you are, sweetheart, I lied, stroking his thin hair, my heart shattering into a million pieces. You're the bravest boy I know. For a brief, precious moment, there was a glimmer of hope. Alex seemed to be responding to a new, more aggressive treatment protocol. His color improved. He started eating a little more, even asked to play with his beloved Legos again. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Mommy, can we go to the park this weekend? He asked one bright morning, and my heart soared with a joy I hadn't felt in months. It was the first time he'd shown any interest in going outside. As soon as you're strong enough, baby, I promise, I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. We'll go to the park and feed the ducks, just like we used to. Can we invite Daddy too? Of course we can, I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. But a week later, everything catastrophically crashed. The call from the hospital came at 3:00 a.m., the shrill ring of the phone jolting me from a fitful, dream-filled sleep. Alex had been admitted the day before with a high fever, but the doctors had assured me it was just a minor setback. Mrs. Peterson, you need to come to the hospital immediately. Alex's condition has deteriorated significantly. The nurse's voice, though professional, was laced with a gentle urgency that set off every alarm bell in my head. I don't even remember the frantic drive to the hospital. Everything was a blur of flashing streetlights and rain-slicked roads. I ran 3 red lights, but I didn't care. All that mattered was reaching my son. By the time I arrived, it was too late. The doctors were already working on him, their faces grim, and I could see in their eyes that they were fighting a losing battle. The next few hours were a living nightmare of hushed medical terms, desperate measures, and finally, devastating silence. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Peterson. We did everything we could. Dr. Martinez's voice cracked as she delivered the unbearable news. His little system was just too weak to fight anymore. I sat by his bedside for hours afterward, holding his small, cold hand, completely unable to process the horrifying reality that my beautiful, brave little boy was gone. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky with the pale hues of dawn when Blake arrived, his face ashen with grief. Maddie, he whispered, pulling me into a tight, comforting embrace. Oh God, Maddie. Through my thick fog of grief, I managed to text Brittany. Alex died, funeral in Menace. Her response came 5 agonizing minutes later. Okay, just that one word, lowercase, devoid of any emotion, any condolences. any acknowledgement that her nephew, a child she'd known since birth, had just died. When I finally found the strength to call my mother an hour later, her response was even more shockingly callous. I had to steady myself against the wall as I dialed, desperately needing to hear my mother's voice, needing the comfort only a mother could provide. "Oh yes, Brittany told us," she said, her voice distant and strangely distracted. "Listen, honey, about the funeral, we won't be able to make it. We have other commitments that day." "Other commitments?" I repeated, convinced I must have misheard. The world seemed to tilt precariously on its axis. "Yes, Brittany's housewarming party is that day, and I promised to help her prepare. You understand, don't you? These things are so much work, and we've already invited everyone. It would be such a hassle to reschedule." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Mom, this is Alex's funeral we're talking about. Your grandson's funeral." "I know, dear, and it's very sad, but life goes on, doesn't it? Brittany's been planning this party for weeks. We can't disappoint all her guests." I didn't understand. I couldn't understand. The world had stopped making any sense the moment Alex's precious heart stopped beating. But this was beyond comprehension. How could my own mother choose a housewarming party over her own grandson's funeral? My hands shook uncontrollably as I frantically dialed Brittany's number. "What the hell are you thinking?" I demanded as soon as she picked up, the phone nearly slipping from my trembling fingers. "Why are you having your party on the day of Alex's funeral?" "Because that's the day I want to have it," she replied, her voice chillingly cold and matter-of-fact. I could hear music faintly playing in the background, the sound of her moving around what was supposed to be her new home. "I've been planning this for weeks. All the invitations are sent out." "Brittany, this is my son's funeral we're talking about. My son, your nephew, the little boy who used to make you birthday cards every year. Can't you just move the party?" "Why should I?" she snapped, and I heard something crash loudly in the background. "It's just a funeral. He's dead anyway. It doesn't matter to him when he goes in the ground. I'm alive and I want to celebrate my new house. Do you know how long I've waited for this?" The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the cold kitchen floor. In that moment, something inside me irrevocably broke, and something else, something harder and colder, took its place. I thought about all the times Brittany had feigned concern when I cried over Alex's illness, all the empty promises she'd made to be there for me. Had it all been a cruel act? The funeral itself was a blur of black clothes and whispered condolences. Blake stood beside me, a steady, silent presence, his hand occasionally squeezing mine. When the crushing grief threatened to completely overwhelm me, my mother and stepfather showed up for exactly 10 excruciating minutes, looking incredibly uncomfortable in their hastily donned black coats worn over what were clearly party clothes. "We can't stay long," my mother whispered, not quite meeting my eyes. "Brittany needs help setting up." I watched them leave, feeling nothing but a vast, cold emptiness where my heart used to be. Their car hadn't even left the parking lot before I saw my mother checking her phone, undoubtedly coordinating party details with Brittany. "Did you hear about Brittany's party?" my cousin Sarah whispered to me during the meager reception. "She invited half the town. None of us are going, of course. It's not right. We all told her so, but she wouldn't listen." I nodded slowly, a plan already beginning to solidify in my mind. The grandmother's house was still legally mine. Brittany had the keys, yes, but not the deed, not the paperwork, not the legal right to host anything there. At precisely 6:00 p.m., the exact time I knew Brittany's grotesque celebration would be in full swing, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the local police department, reporting intruders at my grandmother's house. My voice was surprisingly steady as I gave them the address, explaining that people were occupying my property without my explicit permission. The second call was to my lawyer, confirming that all the property documents were in order. "Everything's exactly as it should be," he assured me. "The house is still legally yours. No transfers have been processed." I arrived at my grandmother's house just as the police cruisers pulled up, their flashing lights cutting through the early evening gloom. The music was blaring, some mindless pop song about celebration and good times. And through the brightly lit windows, I could see people dancing, drinking, laughing. Brittany was in the middle of it all, resplendent in a new, gaudy dress, playing the gracious hostess in a house that legally belonged to me. The police officers were professional and efficient. I calmly showed them the necessary documents, my hands steady as I pointed out the property deed with my name clearly listed as the owner. "This is my property," I stated clearly, my voice carrying across the sudden stunned silence as the music abruptly cut off. "These people are here without my permission." The ensuing chaos was almost beautiful to witness. Brittany's face contorted from initial confusion to incandescent rage as her guests, realizing the gravity of the situation, began to discreetly slip away, not wanting to be entangled in a property dispute with the police present. Her carefully arranged party food sat abandoned on tables, her cheap decorations suddenly looking tawdry and pathetic under the harsh reality of the moment. But she gave me this house," Brittany shrieked, mascara streaming down her face in black rivulets as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "Tell them, Mom, tell them how she promised it to me." Our mother and stepfather, looking utterly mortified, tried to intervene, but without any legal documentation, their frantic words meant absolutely nothing. They could only stand by, helpless, as Brittany's perfect party crumbled into dust around her. "Show me the paperwork, Brittany," I said calmly, standing amidst the remnants of what was supposed to be her moment of triumph. "Show me where I legally transferred this house to you." When the last of her bewildered guests had finally dispersed, leaving behind a scene of utter disarray, Brittany exploded. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, a terrifying distortion of the sister I thought I knew. All pretense of sisterly affection was brutally stripped away. "You stuck-up bitch!" she screamed, knocking over a vase of delicate flowers, sending water and shattered petals cascading across the polished wooden floor. "You've always had everything. Rich husband, big house, everyone's sympathy. I hate you. I'm glad your husband left you, and I'm glad your little brat is dead." The venomous words echoed in the suddenly silent room, each syllable a poisoned dart aimed directly at my already shattered heart. I instinctively turned to my mother, expecting some semblance of horror, of shock, at Brittany's monstrous cruelty. Instead, she moved to stand defiantly beside Brittany, her own face hard with cold anger. "You've always been selfish, Madison," she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "Always thinking you're better than everyone else just because you married rich, just because you had a sick child everyone felt sorry for." A cold, stark clarity washed over me as I stared at them, standing united in their bitter resentment. For years, I had been silently supporting them financially, $1,500 every single month without fail, directly deposited into their account. Christmas gifts, birthday presents, surprise packages, just because. The extravagant cruise I'd paid for last year, Mom's brand new kitchen renovation, the exorbitant repairs for my stepfather's ridiculously expensive Mercedes, all while they consistently favored Brittany, made excuses for her appalling behavior, and enabled her worst impulses. "Let me make something very clear," I said, my voice icily steady, devoid of any emotion. "From this moment on, the money stops. All of it. The monthly deposits, the gifts, the random acts of generosity you've come to expect. It's done." My mother's face drained of all color. "You wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't I?" I retorted, my gaze unwavering. "You chose a housewarming party over your own grandson's funeral. You're defending the person who just celebrated my child's death. Watch me." My stepfather stepped forward, his face now flushed a furious red. "Madison, let's not be hasty. We all say things we don't mean when we're upset." "I mean every single word," I cut him off, my voice like shards of glass. "You won't see another penny from me, ever. Get out of my house, all of you, and don't ever contact me again." "You can't do this to us. We're your parents." My mother's voice cracked, the crushing reality of what she was losing finally hitting her. "No," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "Parents don't do what you did. Parents don't choose a party over their grandson's funeral. Parents don't defend someone who celebrates a child's death. You're just people I used to know." "This isn't over," Brittany hissed, her eyes blazing with hatred as they finally turned and walked away, but I could see the flicker of fear deep within them. She had always relied on our parents' financial support, and now I had just severed their main source of extra income. "You'll regret this," she spat over her shoulder. The very next day, social media exploded with my mother's self-pitying posts about my cruelty, and Brittany's tearful, dramatic pronouncements about being homeless. Of course, they conveniently omitted the crucial detail about choosing a party over to Alex's funeral. The truth, however, has a way of surfacing. Our relatives and friends who had witnessed the meager attendance at the funeral and seen the tone-deaf party invitations knew exactly what had transpired. "Who throws a party on the day of their nephew's funeral?" my cousin Sarah commented publicly, her disgust palpable. "And who helps prepare for that party instead of attending their own grandson's funeral? Shame on all of you!" The backlash was swift and merciless. Brittany's pathetic attempts at portraying herself as a victim of sisterly betrayal were met with widespread condemnation and ridicule. When someone leaked the information about the substantial financial support I had been providing them for years, the online commentary became even more scathing. She was eventually forced to shut down all her social media accounts as the story of her heartless celebration and our parents' enabling behavior spread like wildfire. Months crawled by. Slowly, painstakingly, I began the arduous process of healing, attending weekly therapy sessions, learning to navigate life with the gaping, Alex-shaped hole in my heart. My therapist, Dr. Anderson, gently helped me work through the complex layers of grief, not just for my precious son, but for the idealized family I had always longed for, but never truly had. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, my kind neighbors called, their voices filled with concern. There was vandalism at my grandmother's house. "Someone's breaking all the windows, Madison," Mrs. Jenkins reported, her voice shaking slightly. "I can hear the glass shattering from here." Thankfully, due to a nagging sense of unease, I had installed security cameras shortly after the inheritance, a precaution that now seemed eerily prescient. The footage was horrifyingly clear. It showed Brittany methodically working her way around the small house, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred as she hurled rocks through each and every window. I didn't hesitate for a single second to press charges. When my mother called, her voice a desperate, tearful plea for me to reconsider, I felt nothing but a cold, detached sense of satisfaction.
"You'll ruin her career," she wailed over the phone. "She'll lose her job at the city administration."
"Think about her future." "Like she thought about Alex's funeral?" I replied flatly and hung up. Brittany was indeed fired when the damning video went viral. The court ordered her to pay substantial fines and damages. Last I heard, she was unemployed and living with our parents. Her once prestigious position at the city administration just another casualty of her own corrosive hatred. Some might call it cruel, but I feel absolutely no remorse. Every time I visit Alex's grave, I vividly remember Brittany's callous words about my brat and her celebratory party on his funeral day. Some things are simply unforgivable. Just yesterday, during my therapy session, Dr. Anderson gently asked if I ever thought about reconciling with my family. "They're not my family anymore," I answered, my gaze fixed on the vibrant spring tree just beginning to bloom outside her office window. Family doesn't do what they did. I'm learning to live again, one fragile day at a time. Alex, in his short but impactful life, taught me about unconditional love, the kind that stubbornly persists even when your heart is shattered into a million pieces. Tragically, Brittany taught me about unconditional hate, the kind that consumes everything it touches and leaves only destruction in its wake. And I finally learned that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you ultimately end up with. As I sit in my quiet house, surrounded by cherished photos of my sweet Alex, I know deep down that I made the right choice. Some bridges, once burned to ashes, should remain exactly that, ashes. And sometimes the only way to truly honor the memory of those we've lost is to sever ties with those who so profoundly dishonored their passing. A valuable lesson. This heartbreaking story serves as a stark reminder that blood ties do not automatically equate to genuine family. True family is built on love, respect, empathy, and unwavering support, especially during times of profound grief. When those fundamental elements are absent, and are instead replaced by selfishness and cruelty. It is not only justifiable, but often necessary to prioritize your own well-being and sever those toxic connections, no matter how painful it may seem. Protecting your peace and honoring the memory of loved ones sometimes requires making incredibly difficult choices. What are your thoughts on this situation? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision regarding family? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content.